Kia ora. Namahi nui, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome to the WOW 2023 Summit. It's been an interesting series so far, and today's topic, emerging technologies for a decarbonised economy, is something I've been looking forward to because I don't know an awful lot about it. We have today as the panellists Carly Green, who will be doing the introductions in more detail and leading the discussion. Eric Laakmann, who's from Seachange hydrofoil. Anthony Jones from H.W. Richardson. And I know some of these people, and Mike Casey, who I do know very well, from Forest Lodge. All have been involved in recent technological changes, and their progress is something I look forward to over the coming years, because I think it's going to open people's eyes across the country. But just some housekeeping. First of all, could you please make sure your cell phones are on silent? The exits are fairly clearly marked in case of an emergency. If there's an earthquake, please basically get somewhere safe, lie flat, whatever. And when it ends, the same as with a fire, when we can leave immediately if there's a fire, we congregate on the green outside down by the other side of the river, and we'll do a check there. The toilets are out the back on the right. In general, we ask people, if they're asking questions, to not make statements before they make the question. It can take rather a long time. And I'm not sure how we're taking questions this time. We're taking them through Menti. My apologies. Please put your questions through Menti. We'll read out the code for Menti before the questions end. We'll start, rather. Okay, over to Carly. Thank you very much.
Test.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. Jeff is one of our board members with WOW, so thanks very much for the introductions, Jeff. Welcome, everyone. Kia ora. My name's Carly Green. I'm from Environmental Accounting Services, and it's a great pleasure to be facilitating this panel today on decarbonising technologies. As Jeff said, we'll be taking questions after or during the session, so I'm sure some of the amazing information you'll receive will trigger some questions as we go, so please use the Menti app. The numbers up here, I know my eyesight's failing me, so I found it quite hard to read on the pink, but if you do need the number, I can call it out after we've had our first introductions. So as Jeff mentioned, we've got three great innovators in the decarbonising space, and I'd like to start off the discussion this afternoon by allowing each of our panellists to give us a bit of an overview of their particular technology, I guess a little bit of their story to kick us off. So I'm going to start right here with you, Eric. Eric Laakmann is the CEO of Seachange Hydrofoil, and maybe if you could just give us a nice story about what you've been doing and what you've been up to.
Yeah, thanks so much, Carly, and thank you to Monique for legal battle. They figured out how to get it in. They secretly tested the technology on a lake called Arapuni in North Island, completely unmarked. Small vessels, no one would have known it was Team New Zealand. And then when they put that on the AC-72, which was the big foiling catamarans that you saw in San Francisco, photos leaked out, and people didn't believe it was possible. People thought they'd photoshopped it. And Team New Zealand actually has a bunch of emails from people saying, haha, nice Photoshop. Because the implications were profound. Those boats could already sail faster than the wind, but with that technology, they can now sail 2 or 3 times faster than the wind. And so that's one element of what we're doing. The other element is from the automotive space. And so we've seen in the 1990s, the first electric cars coming out. The 2000s, the Prius started gaining popularity. In the 2010s, Tesla is really at the beginning of its story. And now in the 2020s, really at the beginning of that hockey stick of ramping up electrification in the automotive space. And why is that important? Well, electric vehicles are substantially more sustainable than gasoline-powered vessels, about 3 times more sustainable in terms of the amount of energy that's actually used. And so at Seachange, what we're doing is we're combining the tech developed for sport, for sailing, which is hydrofoiling, which is a 5 times efficiency gain, and the technology developed for automotive, which is about a 3 times efficiency gain. And it's not additive. It's not an 8 times efficiency gain when you put these together. It's a 15 times increase in sustainability in terms of how little energy it takes to move forward. And that's a big step change. And I think in a sustainable future, when every single industry is trying to decarbonize, it's not going to be something that we can ignore. And so I think for the 34 million boats that are out there in the world, I think a substantial portion of them will go hydrofoiling in a sustainable future. So it's a bit about me, a bit about Seachange. Anthony?
Over to you, Anthony.
I'm nowhere near as impressive as all of that. I've never sailed across an ocean, but I did decide on my honeymoon to bareboat sail around the Whitsundays, which, when my wife had never been on a yacht before, was probably not a good idea. We just celebrated our 21st anniversary yesterday, so maybe that was a good start. So,
It sounds like a lovely time.
yeah, 45 minutes into it on the bareboat, I didn't think we were going to survive the next week, but we did. Yeah, I'm, so as introduced, Anthony Jones. I'm the CEO of HWR, or HW Richardson Group, the largest company no one's ever heard of. For those who are Wanaka-based, you will know our brands, which are Allied Petroleum, and Upper Clutha Transport is probably the visible brand that people around here would see. We're a group of companies privately owned by a family down in Invercargill. Started with 1 truck, we now have 1,300. We also, the other brand, that you would know is our Allied Concrete brand, the yellow and blue concrete trucks, which are nationwide. So why when we have 1,300 trucks do we care about sustainability? Why are we getting into this thing called hydrogen? Because for us, there's got to be a multitude of energy sources moving forward, and for us, we've played with hydrogen for probably about 3 years now, and it is the only solution that we see at this point in time for heavy mass and long distance, and that's why we chose hydrogen, because most of our transport needs are that. And when you look at a nation like New Zealand, which runs off the back of a truck, everything you consume moves in a truck. We Kiwi Rail obviously do a fair bit of that, but it's moving more and more and more to road. So for us, we started playing with that, and what we've done now and committed is our own balance sheet, $12 million to invest into a high production hydrogen facility down in Invercargill and dual fuel trucks. We see it going to 100% hydrogen, but we're running dual fuel, and that's offsetting about 40% of the carbon emissions, which is the equivalent of taking 15 cars off the road with every 1 truck that's dual fueled for us. So we see that as a transitionary tech, and then as the technology and more importantly the new fuel network builds out, we'll move to that 100 zero emissions vehicle. So exciting times for us. Our fuel point, we were hoping to have been commissioned now, but there was something called supply chain challenges off the back of some other thing called COVID, which has slowed down our ability to deliver that, but we're due to have that up and running in December this year, so not too far away. And we've got 2 trucks on the road at the moment.
Well, kia ora everyone. I think I know a lot of people in this room already. A number of you would have heard me bang on about what I've been doing for the last couple of years, ever since I moved here from Sydney in 2019. But essentially I'm a cherry farmer 30 minutes down the road in central Otago that has electrified all 20 machines on our property. And as a result, we think we're the first commercial farm in the world that uses no fossil fuels at all, which is super exciting. And my goal now is to figure out, if I've done 20 machines, how to do the 10 million approximate machines left in New Zealand that are fossil fuel, where the technology is readily available right now to replace them. So that's what my new vision and goal is all about doing.
Nice. So we've got 3 pretty forward-thinking, front of the pack companies here, really focused on decarbonisation in New Zealand and making already big changes to our greenhouse gas emissions. I guess from Seachange's point of view, Eric, who would be who is the consumer, or who are you marketing your product to? Like, who's the purchaser of your technology?
Yeah, so any time you're introducing a new technology, it's super important to identify who are your early adopters, who have the biggest reasons, biggest whys to opt into your tech. And so for us, there's tons of different personas in the marine space in terms of different commercial operators or recreational boaters, but the two that are most promising for us are harbor ferry operators, of which there are many in New Zealand, and sustainable tourism operators, of which there are many in New Zealand. And basically, harbor ferry operators, they turn their boats on at probably 5 in the morning. They do not turn them off until 10 o'clock at night, and they do that day in, day out. It's to the point where they put so many hours on their diesel engines that they're actually replacing them after 3 years, cutting a hole in the side of the boat, pulling them out, putting a new one in. And so those customers are using a ton of fuel, and a key benefit of our technology is reducing fuel costs by 90%. And so there's really strong economic incentives for these types of operators to replace their vessels. And the second is sustainable tourism operators, probably operators who might be operating in the lakes down here or in the Bay of Islands or within Auckland, but who are already advertising a sustainable experience or a communion with nature to their customers, while they're in some small way degrading it with fossil fuels. And they do that because they have no choice. The only way they can deliver the service is with fossil fuels. But as soon as there's a better way, it becomes a competitive advantage, not just economically, but for the customer as well. And so those are the two places that we're starting.
Nice. So we're talking about saving money, but also, I guess, connecting with people who want to be, basically operating more sustainably, or having an experience that's more sustainable. What other ways do either three of you communicate how to scale what you're working on? Beyond, say, saving money is one key one, I think, that's across all three. But are there any other barriers, I guess, to scalability that you can see through the people you're trying to connect with?
So the way I think what we need to be doing in New Zealand really when it comes to sustainability is figuring out how to sequence our decarbonisation in our own unique way. New Zealand is a very highly isolated country in the middle of the Pacific Ocean with a huge agriculture industry. And so therefore trying to inherit the narrative from overseas isn't really something that's necessarily applicable to us here in New Zealand. And we have other major advantages that others don't have, in particular our highly renewable electricity grid. What I get excited about in New Zealand, and I will go back to the economic point that you just brought up, we have the highest fossil fuel prices probably in the Western world and some of the lowest electricity prices, which means New Zealand is probably in pole position to move first on the complete electrification of our country. And that is a super exciting opportunity. I love the fact that even climate deniers can save money on this journey. And my number one thing to disarm people on this journey is to talk about electrifying everything that you don't love. So if there's a car enthusiast or a chef who really likes cooking with gas, just don't attack that machine. Don't go after them for that machine. That is a hobby to not economical. Allow them to continue to do that, but encourage them to electrify all the things they don't love, like potentially their gas hot water system or potentially their old clunky car with a new EV. And that all comes back to economics. So I find even though at the core of why I've done what I've done has come down to a want and a desire to act on climate, I very, very rarely talk about carbon now. I always talk about the economic benefits of doing so and relate that back to my traditional business, which is showing now a $56,000 a year savings in energy bills by essentially electrifying 20 machines and putting some solar on the roof. It's just a fundamental shift in the way that we do things, and the economics allows for much easier sequencing of telling people when they should do these different things. The key point that I always come back to when we do talk about climate is the Nature study from 2019 that came out that essentially said if we retire every fossil fuel machine in the world at its natural end of life, we will keep global warming to 1.8 degrees. And the problem is we want 1.5 degrees and we keep buying new fossil fuel machines. So therefore, that's where I see the main action that we can take. There's 10 million machines, which is the fate is decided around the dinner table, and that is largely economic. That brings down the cost of living for those that are making those decisions. And there's tens of thousands of boardroom table decisions which will be made very quickly when the economics stacks up. So, yeah, hopefully that answers your question. But yeah, essentially I focus almost purely now on the economics. That's the way to get everybody singing from the same song sheet.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing that we see that is the inhibitor for large-scale adoption through the corporate world is what you touched on, Mike, about what we're talking about electrification. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about converting from burning a fuel source to burning, to no longer burning, to going to electrification. And when you talk about hydrogen, it's through the power grid. When you talk about EV, it's through the power grid. And so the challenge that New Zealand has and needs to move quickly around is how much generation do we have? And do we have the generation capacity in amongst the electrification network to actually decarb? Because that's the inhibitor, that's the biggest inhibitor I see. For us, for example, in our allied concrete business, we could buy off the shelf an EV today, an electric agitator truck that could service our business needs. We would brown out Auckland if we plugged our fleet in when they came home at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So Auckland grid would just shut down. So the biggest thing that the government needs to focus on is the energy transition and the strategy for production. And that's the biggest challenge that we as a nation have, because the big projects like TY and things that are being talked about to actually won't be for the benefit of New Zealand. They'll actually be shipped offshore if we don't get the policy settings right. So a lot of good corporate will, which Eric touched on, that there is people there who want to actually get behind it. HWR is one of those. You've got 2 other companies here that are willing to do that. But from the big end of town, what I have seen is there's a lot of willingness to want to adopt new technologies. The trepidation comes from the scale of the network available. So you end up with a stranded asset. And that's where the beauty of Mike's project is. It's insular and it's replicable. So how do we start to do that with farms that are insular and you actually don't have to go off your network, off your reservation, so to speak? Work with those, scale those very quickly, and then build out the electrification network and the network of the fuel system. That's what we've got to get on and do.
How confident are you that we can do that, Anthony?
Not very, to be honest. Like I think that the country has some real fundamental issues. My experience with government has been that they do not want to talk to a going concern business. They very much want to talk to other companies or other consultants who are willing to tell them something which makes no sense to a going concern business. Now, look at how much money of our own business, we have not taken one single government grant. And I got laughed out of the Environment Commissioner's office saying, why are you going down the hydrogen path? To when I simply just said, he said, it's 30% less efficient than EV. And they're right. You get 100% transition from generation to a battery. You get 100% transmission, right? So that power in goes to 1-to-1. Hydrogen, you lose it through efficiency, and there's some really smart tech that's happening that's lessening those losses, but it's about 30% loss from power to the electrolysis process. I simply said to the bureaucrat that he had there with him, and I said, okay, so you lose 30% payload on an EV truck. So we go from 58 tonne, we go down That means 30% more trucks on the road. It means 30% more roading infrastructure in Auckland. It means 30% more drivers today to do today's freight task. And it was like the first time they'd thought about it. And it's like, guys, you've got to start to work with industry, with incumbents, and show them the economic benefit, because there are real benefits. It's how we come in concert as a community, as a government, and as a country to seek the opportunities and lever the opportunities. And that's my concern. I see some elements where people want to engage, and that's why we just at HWR, because we're privately owned, we don't have a big board, we don't have shareholders that we have to worry about, as in public shareholders. We're just going to put our money where our mouth is, and we're going to shape where we need to go.
This is just further to one of our stakeholders. We work with MBIE and as well as ECA on our projects, and one of the things we frequently talk about with them is sustainability in terms of carbon emissions actually means economic sustainability for an island nation that doesn't produce its own fossil fuels. Right now, every liter you buy, a few dollars are shipped offshore, and that's not sustainable for New Zealand. So there's a really strong economic case with our government stakeholders as well for either using hydrogen or electricity directly.
We will go from the worst current account in the OECD to one of the best if we can get households off fossil fuels. It's as simple as that. So I think that's a really pertinent point that you bring up, that we buy so much fossil fuels, which essentially ends up going to a lot of places that have very strong ethical concerns as to where that is coming from. I'm much more optimistic on this, but only because I've discovered how to do it. And it's not applicable to everyone, and everyone's business and everyone's household has its own nuances. But my cherry farm in my house, I use 900% more electricity than the previous farmer that owned the property does. Looked at all the figures, and that sounds really scary until I also tell you that I use 5% less electricity during peak periods, right? And that's from generating my own power and storing that power in batteries, and essentially making sure I'm not drawing power from the grid when everyone else in this region is drawing power from the grid. Arguably, that means I need no more poles and wires in order for my business to have fully electrified, right? And the important thing that we need to get across to everyone in Wellington, because no one is really catching on to this yet, they all think the consumer is dumb. They all think we're just there to take power and that we don't have any control over taking of that power. And very much in the 70s and 80s that was the case. But the technology that we have available now, solar and batteries and timing systems and smart electrical systems, ultimately means the consumer needs to be considered part of the infrastructure of the national grid moving forward. We will need about 350% more electricity, right, as a country, which is a far cry from the 68% that Transpower is currently telling us that we need. We're going to need about 350% more electricity. That is going to need to come from central generation. It's going to need to come from wind farms, solar farms, any other generation that we can think of, and it's also going to have to come from our roofs. And one of the most exciting things about this whole thing is that rooftop solar delivered to you, the power that you generate from your rooftops delivered to your appliances is the cheapest energy in human history, right? And so when we think about it like that, not only are we in a case that we can rapidly decarbonise New Zealand, but we can also save everyone a lot of money in the process.
Yeah, and I think to touch on my point about rooftop solar, there's incumbency here that's protecting their businesses. So they don't want a decentralised distribution network.
Yeah, that is 100% true. The other thing that I didn't mention, which I also get really excited about, is that 2030, 2035, everyone's going to have 200 kilowatt hours of storage parked in their driveways. Right, everyone's going to have a boat parked in their boat garage, especially here in Wanaka. And everyone's, those that have jet skis will have storage. Those who have hot water cylinders will have storage. There is a lot of places to put a lot of power when we have an abundant use of power. And there's a lot of things that we can just turn off during times when we are under peak load. So I think that's a really significant thing. No one in government that I have seen has done any form of modelling of what the energy system would look like with a complete oversaturation of rooftop solar and battery storage in every household in New Zealand, and that's probably what needs to happen so that we don't end up charging us as electricity customers the billions and billions of dollars to build out an electricity grid. So yeah, that's I think a really pertinent point, that all of this technology is all makes this transition super exciting.
It really does. So you're really talking about rethinking completely how we generate, store, use, consume, transport energy, pretty much. That's what we're talking about. And I think, so I'm hearing that you're, we have to do that. I mean, how do we do that? It doesn't sound like it's being thought about at the higher level in terms of strategic or at a pace fast enough. So how do we manage that?
I think it is, but it's being thought about. I think you touched on the more important part, at the pace at which it was being delivered. Minister Woods was a huge advocate for that. Look, we're going through a transition in government, so it's going to be interesting to see what gets supported, and I think that's a real risk as we transition, because she was a real advocate for new emerging technologies. Lost my train of thought, but I think it is, it's an interesting space that we're in at the moment.
It's a sequencing issue. A household is 6 easy decisions, 6 machines, right? Your hot water, the 1.8 cars you have in your household, your stove, your spatial heating, if the solar on the roof, the battery in the garage, and actually, if Eric has his way, probably 7 easy decisions if you include the boat. And that's all it is. And the answer is, don't do it too fast. There's a large capital cost associated with doing this stuff. But every New Zealander needs to know that we are probably at the point yesterday where buying the electric machine is economically more beneficial than buying the fossil fuel machine over the lifetime ownership of a product, right? And so the decision point is what we need to be encouraging people to make the right decision.
And at least within our space, so ferries, Auckland Transport has basically said they refuse to purchase another gasoline or petrol-powered vessel, which is huge. Our lead customer, Folders 360, they're fully on board with that as well. Because the reality is that, for a boat or a ferry, that's a piece of CapEx that's going to last for 20 years. And I think people know that the world's going to look a lot different in 2043 than it does in 2023.
Yeah, that's the concept of what we call committed emissions, which is when you buy a new fossil fuel machine like a car, the average length of time that car is going to be on the road in New Zealand is 20 years. So that's not, we always look at things around annual emissions of a vehicle, but you can't just choose to put electricity into that vehicle. That vehicle is a combustion engine vehicle until the day that it dies. And so the concept of committed emissions becomes something that I've been talking to Carly a bit about how is it that we can do more in this space to attack the purchasing decision. Why not, if we know what the price of carbon is, instead of offsetting those emissions every year, we can now look at what can we do in terms of influencing that decision by allowing the offsets of 20 years of emissions by buying the electric version and not the petrol version. So that's a concept of committed emissions. And essentially, as Eric was saying, that's what's super important now. It's not that we hurry people along or we guilt them or we make them feel bad about driving their diesel ute or whatever it might be around. I think for a lot of this has been, the climate narrative in New Zealand has been really mismanaged around this sort of narrative of guilt and sacrifice, shiver a bit more and eat a bit less, and the climate will solve itself. And that's just not the way that we need to be approaching this. We need to be approaching this from making sure every New Zealander knows that the electric machine is probably the best machine for them. And then on top of that, making sure that if they know that's the right decision, that every New Zealander has the ability to make that decision. So.
So we've got lots of questions coming in thick and fast from the audience, and I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this one for you, Mike, and that's, the question is, what's your favourite form of renewable energy generation? And maybe we could start here and why, considering the social and environmental co-benefits of that energy source.
100% solar. There's 1,000 watts per square meter hitting the earth during sort of when the sun's at its peak, and that, if you multiply that by the land area of New Zealand, is massive. And solar panels are so cheap, so cheap. So there's just an infinitely, not infinitely, but it's a very attainable form of sustainable energy. And to Mike's point, there's a lot of roofs out there in New Zealand.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's a lot more aesthetically pleasing than others.
Says the Southlander.
The supply side of energy, the people that generate energy and try to sell it to you, have big plans for solar systems, but they also have big plans for offshore wind. They have big plans for other forms of renewable energy as well. The short answer is all of them are going to be required. The thing is that we're moving too slowly on the supply side. It's a real incumbent large ship with a really, really small rudder. The great thing about solar panels is that you don't need permission to put them on your roof. You can just go and do it, and then it will drive your cost of living down. And so that's probably the main reason why they're my favourite. To put a wind turbine up on your property is going to probably annoy the hell out of the neighbours. Solar panels, probably not. So the resistance or the barriers to entry are so much lower.
One of the questions I regularly get asked when people are trying to make a decision around a new asset or a change in their energy supply is around the embodied emissions. We touched on it a little bit, but I guess I'd like some advice about how I would respond to that question. Like, do I get rid of my diesel now when I've already got it, or for an EV? Do I, try and find other? Do I change my materials? So, yeah, how do you deal with that embodied emissions question?
Everyone forgets that there's embodied emissions in diesel as well.
They do.
So no one talks, or everyone goes, okay, there's 2.68 kilos of carbon dioxide in a combusted litre of diesel, right? They forget about the 300 grams of embodied emissions involved with getting it out of the ground, refining it, and transporting it to New Zealand. So the answer is that embodied emissions of any of this technology is largely a moot point, because the embodied emissions of the fuels that we currently use are also incredibly high. So if you can square them off and say that they're equal, I haven't done the numbers around that for everything, but I believe that that's largely the case. If you can square them off and say that those are equal, then obviously the less emissions during operation as the electric vehicles or electric machines win out massively.
Yeah, one of the things we get talked to about on the concrete side, on the cement side. Yeah, so we've got a great carbon footprint at HWR. For the record, 500,000 tonnes. So we have quite a fair footprint. And the only thing that we can do to abate that in cement at the moment, there's a lot of work being done around natural pozzolans and a whole bunch of sort of things, but there is a supplementary cementitious material, so you can see the reason why we use the acronym SCMs, is a byproduct of either coal being burnt, so fly ash, or metal being produced through blast furnace, so blast furnace slag. Those two products can offset up to 60% of new carbon emissions through the firing of lime to make cement. So that's where the cement industry is moving to, and this is getting more and more uptake. And so the argument comes back though, but it's already got embodied carbon. And you're like, but you're offsetting up to 60% of new emissions that would otherwise not be burnt. So we're starting to work on these. New Zealand, again, is abundant in natural pozzolans, but getting the right chemistry to occur within those natural pozzolans has been a little bit challenging. So the industry, again, there's a lot of goodwill. It is being driven by some policy and bigger businesses taking up the need to actually use these products. But yeah, you do get, it's interesting, you get the naysayer wanting to find holes in everything. And I think to Mike's point, just make the decision and actually go with a lesser carbon emissions outcome, and you're making a difference. You know, we could not make a decision based on naysayers, but we wouldn't move forward. And we've got this. You shared the example before about hydrogen, but we know it's going to make a significant difference, and it's going to be the right thing for the future.
This is a super crude hack, but at least in today's world, where most manufactured goods are made from non-renewable sources, you can almost take the price of a manufactured good, a product like a banana or a car or anything like that, and convert that into energy. Because every piece of that manufactured good is energy in some way. It came from a fuel tank somewhere or a power outlet somewhere. And so typically, the cheaper thing will be the more sustainable thing in today's environment. That'll change in the future when there's more manufactured goods made from renewable energy. But for now, I would say that the cheaper option is normally the more sustainable one.
Staying with you, Eric, there's a question here around international cargo shipping. It currently accounts for about 2% of global greenhouse gas emissions. What potential does your technology have in this space?
Absolutely none. We're not going to see hydrofoiling cargo ships in the future. The reality is that cargo ships are 70 times more efficient than a plane, and this blows my mind, but they are twice as efficient as a train at moving a ton a nautical mile. And so that's mind-blowing. So the question is, what are we going to do for container shipping? And there's a lot of different alternative fuels out there. Hydrogen's a big one out there, methanol as well. And this is maybe a little bit controversial, but nuclear is actually well suited for cargo shipping. There was a nuclear-powered ship in the 1970s called the NS Savannah, and it was not economic to run at fuel prices then, but fuel prices are going to climb. But no one's working on that problem today.
That's an interesting one, though. So my background, if anyone LinkedIn me, would have seen that I spent 20 years in amongst shipping and heavy rail. The interesting thing to get, and you can probably pick up an accent as well. Sorry about that. But we lose it everything in sport. We lose it at everything in sport, so that makes up for it, I think. But policy. So everyone knew coastal shipping was the right thing to do in Australia, but policy got in the way. The government actually favoured rail to push cargo across the country, across the transcontinental, to the detriment of coastal shipping. And so when you start to see these things play out, you just but only shake your head. And this is where you've got to actually blank sheet it and say, what is the right mode to shift our freight task? Because there's still going to be a freight task. There is going to be. There's going to be smart tech that's going to bring things more closely to our home bases, but there is still going to be a need. And I think that narrative is starting to shift, but definitely 10 years ago, everything was coming out of China and so on, right? That's starting to shift away. But and corporate decisions are also starting to see that with the carbon footprint, because floating things across the ocean does emit a lot of carbon as well. So, look, I think policy, what I'm trying to touch on is it requires everybody at all levels to actually just shed the encumbrances and say what's the right thing for us moving forward, what's the right sustainable solution. And I've witnessed it firsthand, been the beneficiary in some instances of that firsthand, but not personally, but business-wise, where policy gets in the way of the right outcome.
So we heard from Eric that I guess the technology of the hydrofoiling was sort of started here in New Zealand. In terms of the other technologies that Mike and yourself, Anthony, what other countries are you looking to for inspiration? Is there what's happening elsewhere outside of New Zealand?
So in my particular case, I am not a owner of technical IP. I am the first customer. I am a collection of everybody else's technology. And I believe the first customer is just as important as, or the early adopters are just as important as the innovators around the space, right? Because the early stage startups that are involved in all of this technology building and all this IP and taking the risk ultimately need early adopters to ensure that they are successful. And in my particular case with the 20 machines, I've had to source them from all over the world, and I've had to make my own when we haven't been able to find them, but we have had electric frost fighting fans from South Africa of all places, which is just, to this day, I pinch myself because they have the most unstable electricity grid on the planet, and anyone will be fighting a frost tonight, for example, the last thing they want is for their frost fighting fans to turn off in the middle of a frost. The electric tractor, that was the first in New Zealand, but also the first to be exported out of not only America but California to come here. That obviously came from Silicon Valley, billion-dollar tech startup. And one of the most amazing things is half of the equipment that we get is Chinese. And I think that is proving to be a super interesting change from the way New Zealanders would have thought about the quality of Chinese products 10, 20 years ago. They are by far the world leaders in battery technology. They produce by far the best batteries. And because electric machines require far less maintenance and they're far less complex, the ability to buy new machines out of China can be done so with, I think, considerably less risk. In fact, the first electric decision we made was to order an electric golf cart from Alibaba to run on our orchard. And to this day, 5 years on now, is still running strong.
How much did you pay for it?
$13,000.
That's not much.
Not much at all. Yeah, that's including all shipping. So, yeah. And then body
I want
car
one.
and sea freight and yeah.
We're similar. We're fast followers. We are starting to in-house some of that tech though, just to de-risk. The reason for that is the place we look to and where we're partnering with is out of Europe. They're sort of 10 years ahead in the hydrogen journey to what we are. And what we saw, especially off the Inflation Reduction Act in America, has just been this vacuum of sucking demand out of Europe and out of those partners that we're working with. And so that was a risk for us. So some of that we're starting to in-house and build our own IP, and that's the dual fuel technology side of things. But by and large, we've sought out good partners. Fabram, the guys out of Christchurch, amazing New Zealand company, great engineering company, a real sort of unicorn, I think, sitting in amongst that hydrogen and cryo space. They're our key partners on the fuel production side, and then a company called C&B Tech, which is a shipping company out of Europe, and they started on the hydrogen journey because they too saw a commercial advantage to actually go down that path.
There's a question here about the Onslow sailing on Lake Wakatipu. I'm not sure if you know about this technology, Eric.
No, what is it?
It's a very well.
Oh,
It's
it's the old ship.
Yeah, that's right.
right.
So, do you think your technology could offer an alternative to that?
Yeah, I believe that there's been a retrofit project scope for that, but it will no longer have the passenger capacity to deliver what it used to, and so 100% there's scope for running alongside that. Will we retrofit it with hydrofoils? I don't think so. Yeah, not going to work.
Bit heavy.
They did, Real NZ talked to us about they looked at hydrogen fuel cell and trying to go down that path. I don't know where that landed. There's been a bit of leadership change there since.
Another question around if you could only afford one of either an EV or solar panels, which would you suggest?
No, that is a good question. And the first thing The first thing I would say on that front is probably what interests you more, and and ask a question about what is your lifestyle like. If you drive a lot of kilometres, 100% an EV is the way to go. So going back all the way back to the embodied carbon question, embodied carbon is an absolute rounding error on committed carbon as a result of buying a new fossil fuel machine or continuing to run an old fossil fuel machine that might have 10, 15 years life left. So that's the first thing to sort of take into account. I can't remember exactly offhand what I'm getting, but I think I might be maybe paying 6 cents per kilometre rather than 45. So when you put that into perspective, you can do the sums really easily to work out how much money you're going to be saving, and comparing that to your electricity bill. If we're looking at this from a non-emotive perspective, the answer or in a purely economical perspective, I would say the answer here is if you electrify all the machines in your home, your power bill will go up massively. When your power bill goes up massively, solar panels do a really, really good job of bringing that back down. You definitely lose a lot of the economic impact of solar panels if you continue to burn petrol from your garage and if you continue to use gas in your home. So that would be the first thing there. But that being said, solar panels are the true gateway drug to electrification, because the moment you have them on your roof, you start to question every energy decision that you are making. One of the best decisions that you can make around the economics of solar panels is buying a cheap timer from Mitre 10 and making sure your hot water cylinder turns on during the solar window, where you can put all that surplus energy back into your hot water system. It's a really, really simple hack that will save you, outside of an EV, will probably save you more money than anything else that you will do with solar. So the answer is either or. Sorry.
My answer is don't ask me.
I think you want to be the change you want to see in the world, and I think the EV is just much more visible. Just on the road, your friends, and so I think there's more of a spillover benefit with the EV in terms of the visibility of it.
I was reading an article just this morning about the marketing of EVs at the moment, and the article was quite interesting because it was saying that the marketing is directed towards men, not women, even though women want to buy EVs, but they're less interested in sexy technology, and men seem to really enjoy that. So I thought that was quite interesting that the marketing's not talking to me, but I love my EV. It's super fast and really nice. Yeah, so I would agree, and all my friends love it too.
So it does the speed limit, right, is what you meant?
What's that?
It does the speed limit, is what you meant?
Yeah, that's exactly what I meant. It's very, very effective at doing the speed limit. So there's a question about demand. So we're obviously talking about electrifying all of our energy needs. What about reducing consumption at the same time? How do we balance those two things?
There is actually a book, of whoever asked this question, I'd 100% recommend a book called The Big Switch. It is written with an Australian lens about the Australian economy, and we need to write one for the New Zealand lens by a chap by the name of Dr. Saul Griffith. But the essential answer to this is electrification is the efficiency we've always dreamed of, right? It uses... to put it simply, in a litre of diesel, there is about 10 kilowatt hours worth of energy. If you put that into a combustion engine for propulsion, 20 to 25% of that more than likely will get used to push your car or your vehicle forward. The rest of it is loss of the combination of heat, sound, and vibrations, which is what Eric was talking about before. The easiest and quickest way to reduce consumption is electrification. For that exact reason. I am an internal optimist, because I think in this world, if you're not, it becomes all-consuming. I would like highly highly abundant renewable energy cheaply for all New Zealanders. And if we do this energy transition right, that's where we will end up. So that's what excites me. If we do this energy transition wrong, energy will be unaffordable, and we will have to look at reducing the amount that we use, which will continue down the terrible path we're on at the moment with energy hardship and deprivation.
So you're all in businesses at various stages of development, but pretty much you're demonstrating that the technology is there. So how many other companies are following suit? How many others are following your lead in New Zealand?
Look, I think for us, there's other companies that are actually going into, and Huringa is probably the main one from a fuel production point of view. The challenge that they're seeing is customers coming on board, and that's because fuel cell trucks are hard to get. They're depends which price you take, but they're around about 4 to 5 times dearer than a diesel combustion truck. So there's been some challenges for them. Hyzon have had production challenges as well, which is the main brand that they partnered with. HWR was able to, we sit on both sides. We have our fuel network and we also have our fleet of trucks that run. We got bowled over by inbounds, the likes of Main Freight and others, who said, we want that. We want your dual fuel on our trucks. We could have sold a lot, subscription service or whatever, one of those new commercial models, but where it got to was we said, look, we can give it to you when we've got the fuel network that you can actually refuel through. Otherwise, we would have just been a component of greenwash, where they would have said, we've got a dual fuel truck, but it's got no hydrogen in it. And so that's the real challenge for New Zealand at the moment from hydrogen. It's different to EV, obviously. That's scalable and that's starting to build out quite quickly. But we got bowled over by people, and Mike touched on it before, the capital change cost in the legacy industries is significant. How we work with those legacy industries to actually transition away and show them a pathway, there is a lot of good corporate intent. This is why we at HWR have said it's dual fuel first for the next 5, 7, 10, whatever it takes to build out the network, to give people confidence that when they leave sunny, bright, warm Invercargill and drive to the north, they've got confidence that they can refuel all the way and they don't have a tow truck picking them up. And that's the real challenge for incumbent industries. How do you give them confidence that they're not ring-fenced in a 200k radius with a stranded asset? And so the short is, huge amount of goodwill. People want to do the right thing. We've got to show them the transition and partner with them to work forward.
Nice, very nice.
So we've got our partnership with Fuller's 360, and I believe we'll have the first commercially certified passenger electric vehicle in the world operational in March of next year. And fundamentally, we have a lot of other customers here in New Zealand, but they're waiting to see the results of that. So just a matter of showing them what's possible.
It sounds like it's close there to showing them what's possible, so congratulations on that.
Yep.
Actually, one of the questions that I got wrong at the start, just before, well, not the start, just before, was the question was actually about like Onslow proposal, not the Onslow on Wakatipu.
Oh, yeah.
So, sorry, guys. So, any opinions about that?
Oh, yeah.
Great. This will take us through to the end by the sounds of it.
So the answer is there are 2 contesting sides to the energy transition, one which has a massive voice and one which has almost no voice. The massive voice is the energy incumbents that currently are supplying your energy, no matter whether it's electricity or it's fossil fuels. And the other is the customer, who has almost no voice in this transition at the moment. The simple answer is that rooftop solar could be an answer to our dry year problem, or at least a significant portion of our dry year problem, because of course when it's dry it's also more sunny. And having enough generation would allow the existing hydro stock that we have to become more of a storage facility and less of a generation facility, right? And I think that's a really important thing for customers to understand. And this is why the point I made before, that we need to see what the future energy grid looks like, modeled for an oversaturation of batteries and solar on rooftops of small businesses, farms, and households and communities around New Zealand. The other part that is often argued is that solar is not in any way going to help us with our winter peaking problem, which is our peaks of our electricity grid happen usually when it's not sunny in the middle of winter. But what we've seen time and time again is, solar being the gateway drug to electrification, is when people put solar on their roofs, their behaviour begins to change. My biggest fear in this energy transition is that we build out massive amounts of infrastructure that everyone in this room and everyone in New Zealand will ultimately have to pay for, that ultimately we don't need because of the plummeting cost curves of the technology available to the household and the small business and the farmer and the communities. So we may need Lake Onslow, but I definitely don't think enough analysis has truly been done to say whether it is right or wrong, and I would be very sceptical at the moment about whether that's the right path forward for New Zealand.
Yeah, I probably come in on the back part of your statement there, Mike, about, we could have easily, Manapuri was pizzled at the time when it was put up, right? It was, why would we do that? It's a blessing now. It's an absolute blessing for us. But the challenging that is, how much do you pay for that? And how many times over do you pay for that infrastructure? I think we need bravery again in politics. It's lost, I think, personally, in my view. It's become this short-term political cycle, not these nation-building projects that used to be done back in the day. I think the biggest thing that needs to be done is do the work, show us what can be done with existing technology, with new technology. What's the energy demand for the future? Build that energy demand and commit to that strategy, which gives confidence to incumbents, which give confidence to the general public, and we can get in and start to do this transition. At the moment, you're seeing a lack of confidence, which is leading to a lack of commitment from people to actually decarb.
There's a couple of questions here that I'll probably try and merge together, but effectively, the question is really around the need for all these resources to decarbonise, the lithium being mined, the battery storage, the new technology being implemented. And if the aim is to, try and get to 2 degrees, or let's pray for 1.5, although that seems to be well gone now, if it's trying to get to that as soon as possible, won't dropping convenience and switching to an egalitarian economy where power is harnessed directly from nature be better?
I might need a bit of an elaboration. When we say harnessed directly from nature, does that mean harnessing it from the sun or wind, or?
I'm not sure.
Okay, I'll give it a go. I'll give it a crack.
Just give it a crack.
Whoever asked that question can come up afterwards as well. I like to hit the specific topic out of the park by being a massive dreamer. The answer is that the extraction of minerals across the world, whether it be oil, whether it be lithium, or whether it be some of the terrible mining practices that exist in the DCR around cobalt and other minerals, is not flash, but neither is the extraction of minerals that we currently put into our cars. So that's, I think, the really first important thing to understand. It's not a fault of the technology, it is a fault of the political system that exists that allows this sort of thing to occur. And as a result, my opinion is always that we need to focus on decarbonisation, and the only way to decarbonise, if you can assume that you could go tit for tat on those, is to go down the path of battery electric systems. That being said, I am a dreamer in that I think because the metals that are used in battery technology is so, metal is the easiest thing to recycle. we have the potential to move beyond a post-mining world probably sometime next century, right? Because we mine all the stuff we need out of the ground, and then ultimately, as the global population begins to naturally decline, which every forecast seems to think is going to be happening, we will probably have enough minerals already extracted from the Earth's crust to continue a circular economy. Now, that is something that I've read, that I want to believe. I've got no way of no way of actually evidently saying that that will definitely happen, but I think that's what we can potentially dream of. And again, that will be the new challenge. Once we've solved this climate crisis issue, that will be the next challenge, is how do we eventually pull back on the extraction of minerals from the earth. A good problem to have if we can solve the climate one first.
Can I put my hydrogen hat on?
Go on.
Got my jacket on.
Yep.
I too am a dreamer, and I think, and I've watched it happen. So 2 years ago, I knew nothing about hydrogen, for the record. I think if we can, to the rare earth discussion, there's already been people who have cracked internal combustion hydrogen engines 100%. The challenge is the NOx component of that. When you burn hydrogen, you get a NOx outcome, so it's not completely zero emissions, but it's zero carbon. I believe they will crack that, and then when you look at an internal combustion engine and the materials that are in that, as humans, we've actually done a pretty good job of creating something that runs with limited amount of rare earth material. It's alloy, right? The alloy block and so on. When you compare that to an EV, the discussion, as Mike just said, there's a lot in that. What we've got to do is make sure we get that NOx down, and I think they will get that. I've watched the technology curve exponentially increase. If we can get to that, I think utopia does exist, and I think utopia is actually achievable.
One other thing to mention around rare earth minerals when we're talking about batteries, I can't remember what the figure is offhand, but I think they're estimating the average rare earth materials every human will require is somewhere in the vicinity of 100 to 200 kilos on average. When you think about the amount of minerals we put fuel up in our cars every time we drive them, that is ultimately invisible waste that disappears into the atmosphere and causes us the problems that we now have. The amount of material is just so significantly less. And so that's another really important thing to remember and understand. Yes, it's there. Yes, you can see it. Yes, you notice it. When you're looking at a battery pack, for example, you can't see carbon dioxide molecules, but they are waste. They are just another form of waste, and they're waste that we can't control and spread out evenly all over the atmosphere of the Earth. So again, it comes down to understanding the numbers in a lot of these discussions, for sure.
And I think there's a huge push within the battery technology space to develop chemistries that are far more sustainable. NMC chemistry, nickel, manganese, cobalt chemistry has been the default for a long period of time, but that's changing. And the most popular chemistry now is LFP, and lithium, iron, phosphate are all incredibly abundant materials within the Earth's crust. So I think we'll see a big change. And I am also quite excited about the recycling future and the recycling potential of EV systems, because you don't lose that material to the atmosphere.
I hope we can start to bring some of those recycling technologies here to New Zealand. It's something that we don't do very well at the moment.
The first thing that we need to do is there is not enough batteries in New Zealand to make the recycling of batteries commercially viable. And what we need to do is simply set up battery programs for end of life so that we can stockpile them so that we can get enough for recycling to become commercially viable. It doesn't exist at the moment. People often talk about batteries going to landfill, and the point that I'll make about that is that these are the problem, not the EVs and cars, because they're far too heavy to throw in a wheelie bin. So they're very easy to collect and very easy to put somewhere. Toyota, for example, even though I'm still grumpy with them that they haven't produced an electric Hilux yet, do have a bounty program for all their nickel metal hydrate batteries from all their basically wrecked Priuses here in New Zealand. And that's the first, that's the first stage of collecting batteries for recycling.
Yeah, and standardization too. Cells are getting far more standard today than they used to be. With the 21700 cell, I forgot what the name of the new Tesla cell is, but because the cells are becoming so standard, it makes it far more economically viable to actually set up facilities to recycle batteries, because now you have a huge market for it versus a bunch of different diverse cell types.
There's a question here around TY and the use of that facility post its current use. Do you see it as an opportunity in the decarbonisation space down here?
It's a hydrogen question.
It's a Southland question and a New Zealand question and a global one too. TY is interesting. They haven't done a very good job of communicating where they sit in regards to emissions for aluminium production in the world. They are the lowest carbon emissions aluminium smelter in the world. So I might get screamed off the stage. I think we're going to need aluminium moving forward, right? We're going to need those smelters. And when you look at them comparable to some of the other smelters around the world, if we shut TY down, we actually make emissions worse. We don't make it better, we make it worse. Because what will happen is a more heavily polluting smelter will just increase production to offset the lost production of TY. TY's quality is amazing. And then when you talk, I now call Southland home, when you talk about the GDP benefit that TY brings to not only Southland but to New Zealand, it's significant, right? So you're starting to talk about some real fundamental challenges. I'm an advocate for TY staying. When you look at where the bauxite comes from, it was put there for a reason. It was put there because there was good energy production. It was close to the raw materials floating around from WA. There's reasons for it sitting there, and there's reasons why it sits as the lowest, one of the lowest carbon emissions smelters in the world. I don't think, and the only reason this is even news is because the incumbent power providers want a certain price for the power that's given to it. Otherwise, it wouldn't even be a discussion. It would just continue. And they will get there. Chris Blankine, if anyone's met Chris, he's an amazing human. He actually wants to do a good job for the community and also for New Zealand. We just need the two heads to come together and get the right outcome. Hopefully for Southland, for New Zealand and for the globe, we do get the right outcome. If that doesn't happen, yes, the incumbent electrical provision in there makes sense for some other industrial application. And I think that's one of the big energy transition issues. We have set up production facilities and electrification networks for centralised production, for centralised industrialisation. What we're talking about is moving to decentralisation, and so you need to augment the electricity network accordingly, and that's where my trepidation sits. It's not, the likes of the Manipuri system pumps, what it does into TY. I'll get the megawatts wrong, but it's huge. When you start talking about decentralising, and even from a hydrogen production point, I think it'll be a centralised production if it moves to that, and so TY does lend itself to be that. I touched on it before. If our only aim is to build a green hydrogen facility in TY to then send it to Japan or send it to Germany, I think we've missed an opportunity as New Zealand. New Zealand is amazing at turning rain into things that grow, grass and then animals. That is what our economy is built off. And fundamentally, we actually need to make sure that we can still remain competitive, and there's some great opportunities. Mike grows some other things that's not grass, which we also consume. So, we need to make sure we get that balance right and keep New Zealand competitive, and that's what leaders around the country are grasping with, which I'm one of those. So.
I think the only thing I'll add to that, 100% agree with you. I don't know enough about the aluminium industry to know whether a smelter here long term is good or not. it is a supply-side energy debate about what happens if that smelter shuts down and we have a dam. There's a lot more energy available that's going to affect different businesses in really, really different ways. The one thing I'll add is I 100% agree with you. Hydrogen exports is possibly the daftest idea I've ever heard of, namely because the Australians, with the sunlight hours they have and the ability to roll out something far cheaper in terms of mass solar production, will be able to produce hydrogen 1,000,000 times cheaper than we can. So again, I don't know the numbers, there's a lot of hyperbole in there, but when you just think about that logically for 1 second and you realise what we would be up against to try and compete with yet another global commodity market in a place where our neighbours are far more advantaged than we are. We just have to look at something like the avocado industry and see what's happened there. The Australians can grow avocados a lot better than we can, and it's caused our avocado industry real problems. The same thing will happen with hydrogen.
Eric, what's the most frequently asked question you get about your technology?
Let me think about that. We get asked a lot about seakeeping and how the vessels do in different sea states. And that's one of the key advantages. If you think about, we're developing 2 8-meter water taxis right now. If you think about a 8-meter boat going 25 knots in seas created by 25 knots, you're gonna have a rough time. But if you're on top of the waves, that changes the experience entirely. Now, especially too, because with hydrofoiling, you've decoupled the efficiency of the vessel from the size of the vessel, and you decoupled the vessel from the seas as well. So there's no more incentive to actually create a bigger vessel, because there is this incentive with harbor ferry operators to go huge. But now you don't have that anymore, and so that disappears. And so now you can have smaller vessels that are operating at higher utility on routes, which is also better for sustainability.
Nice. Sounds like you don't get a seasick, is that right?
No, it should be an incredibly stable ride. Remarkably stable.
So there was a question here as well, just to follow on from that, Eric. Are there any marine life benefits with hydrofoiling as well?
Marine life benefits.
Yeah, maybe less sound, or I'm not sure of the context, but yeah.
There's definitely a significant amount of sound reduction. So we can actually count multiple whale watching outfits among our potential customers. They see the benefit of it being quieter, they see the benefit of it being more sustainable. And within the Bay of Islands too, there's recently been a push to create a 5-knot speed zone based on the dolphins interacting with vessels over there. So there should be some benefits, especially acoustically.
You'd have less wake too, wouldn't you?
No wake, zero.
I'm not sure whether you can answer this one or not, but do any of you have any understanding if the BlackRock investment into New Zealand will be to become 100% renewable by 2030? Do you have any knowledge of that or any contribution to make?
I don't know the ins and outs, the details of it, but my number one thing is I support any investment in renewable energy generation. There is a lot of money globally at the moment for this technology. More importantly than that, I think before we even realise it ourselves, a lot of sophisticated money has realised New Zealand is probably the economic pole position economically to do a lot of these things. So I can see why a lot of money is coming in. Ultimately, we just need to make sure that the investment decisions that get made in this infrastructure are in the best interest of the customer, to keep prices low, to keep energy prices low for everyone in this room. That can be done quite easily in cooperation with private capital. It's just got to be done in a way where the average household in New Zealand, through a full electrification journey, we're still doing the numbers on this at the moment, but it could be $4,000 to $5,000 of annual savings a year, which is just such a significant amount of money. And obviously during this energy transition, we want that $4,000 to $5,000 or whatever it might end up being to stay within the household, you know, to stay within the communities and not ultimately head offshore as it currently does with the purchase of fossil fuels. So I'm excited about it, and I think in every case we just have to make sure we ask the right questions so that the everyday New Zealander's best interests are kept at heart.
Yeah, having been owned and managed by Brookfield, who are second in line to BlackRock, PEs are a good vehicle to actually stimulate change. I think to your point, Mike, we just need to make sure the framework and the regulatory framework is not over-regulated, but it's also regulated to look after the consumer, because otherwise returns can get out of kilter where we ultimately as the consumers pay more than we should.
So we've got about 5 or 6 minutes left. If you were going to leave the room with one nugget about decarbonisation, what maybe they can take away from today, what would it be? And I'll start with you, Mike.
6 easy decisions in your home. That's all. That's literally what we have to focus on. It's achievable, and where it's not achievable, due to the upfront capital burden, everyone has got to put their heads together to figure out how it is. You can't half solve climate change. We have to figure out how to bring low socioeconomic New Zealand on this journey, and more importantly, it's the most progressive form of savings that they could possibly do, because they will spend more of their income check on energy. Therefore, the savings from electrification is so much more beneficial there. And also they will have more heads in the household than the average household in New Zealand, which means they will also use more energy. So the savings, anything that looks like it might economically stack up in your household now, economically stacks up last year for low socioeconomic New Zealand. So 6 easy decisions, and then once you've done those 6 easy decisions yourself, how do we help others to make those 6 easy decisions?
As one of the big bad incumbents, you know, we do sell, you know, 1 billion litres of fuel directly in New Zealand. Don't always make it about price as a consumer. If you always make it about price, we might never transition, because when you look at the balance sheets of the incumbents, they're going to protect those balance sheets, and one way for them to do that is to play with price. When you look at Aramco, for instance, they were making $2 billion a week net profit. We don't, for the record, at HWR, make anywhere near that. But we actually resell mobile fuel, for the record, for the audience. Don't make it always about price. Do your homework. Go and see what the return over the longer yield is actually worth versus the purchase price. When we buy a truck, for instance, we do not look at the purchase price. It's actually the total cost of ownership calculation that you need to do. So go and do your homework. The other thing I'd like you to take away is don't think that the incumbent industries are doing nothing. We actually are, where there's a lot of goodwill from CEOs, from boardroom tables to actually go forward, be it big or small, to actually make a difference for our future. So I know there is a lot that gets thrown around that incumbent businesses are holding on, are not trying to transition. We're an example of one that it's actually putting its money where its mouth is and making a difference. So please know there are a lot of other good people like ourselves out there trying to make a difference and trying to lead the way.
This is a specific example that then gets generalized, but the thing that we're doing for boats is we're doing more with less. We're making them use sustainable energy, we're making them more efficient, and therefore the boats are far more capable. They're able to go farther, they're able to charge faster. But that's an analogy for the overall transition, the overall ecosystem we're operating in a sustainable future. I think we should envision it as living in abundance, because we will be able to do more with far less.
Well, I just want to say thank you for sharing the last hour and a half with me and the team here in the room. just communicating, I guess, your experiences and going deep on some of the issues we have here and some of the progress we've made. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Finally, thank you to everyone in the room. I hope I got to most of the key questions, and I hope you really enjoyed the session. Thanks.